the colour of the growth of the colonies, etc., within this plate. Having seen a difference, which is to the experimenter's advantage, this is actually what I want to achieve because I can then perform my actions on that. I will then take that colony, for instance, and then split it up into different plates and take the other colonies as controls and then move them to different plates. Now, if we go back really to the out of Africa idea, partly the fact that the whether it was a lush environment they were in, there wasn't really much incentive for people to go walking thousands of miles to do things. It's more likely, given this scenario and what Nigel hypothesizes, is that really in the same way that I mess with organisms on plates, that these guys were messing with us as a species, really looking for advantageous genetics. Not so much racism, as we said, these things are running according to a program. They only care about whether they can mess with our genes more efficiently. And it turns out that the molecule melanin, actually, when we mess with genetics and stuff, one of the ways in which we can do it is to use things like ultraviolet light to actually splice the genes in the cells and actually alter the genetics, or to get things to, things we've put in to actually take, so that we can almost microsurgically implant them in the cells. The thing is, if these cells have got a lot of melanin in them, it's a dark pigment, it tends to absorb that light and diffract it and turn it into vibrations, etc. And then the light just doesn't get where it's really supposed to go. And so really, in the discovery, perhaps even accidental, discovery of subspecies of us, if you like, or groups of us, which didn't express so much melanin, made it easier for them to get their genetic profiles into us. And therefore they then sort of sent the white people, if you like, or one group further north. Some became the Aboriginals of Australia, some were left in Africa. And so there was this great movement of these different populations, and really then they concentrated on the ones which they had most access to.
Because
so it's not racism in a way.
Yeah, as I said, it's accepted that every person on the planet is basically directly descended from pretty much one Eve in Africa. Now, let's say that was a result, all of the variation that's currently on Earth,
yes.
that was a result of intervention by the Greys, say,
yes.
right? Would geneticists not have spotted that in the human genome? Would they not by now have gone, hey, look, this group have been messed with because that genetic change couldn't have happened so quickly? Would they not have spotted it?
A lot of geneticists think things happen randomly, but random changes can then add up, etc. In fact, a lot of statistics says that random variation, etc., is nearly impossible. And in fact, this has led the genetics crowd really into some really big problems trying to explain things like this. And so what they'll do is, yes, quite rightly, the mitochondrial DNA has fluctuated, and you can backtrack that fluctuation. But what else has happened in terms of other interventions to do with both the DNA and with the things that control what DNA does can actually happen an awful lot faster if deliberately put in there.
Right.
But there is a special, do you want to explain the special about melanin and how it protects the cell, the DNA inside the nucleus? That's very important.
Part of the reason you can't do these experiments, where there's a lot of melanin around, the melanin actually in a lot of people, in black people, it's actually spread out through the skin. It spreads out through the cells and covers everything. But even in a lot of white people, the melanin actually will coat the nucleus of the cell. And therefore the DNA, your central DNA, even in white people, can be actually well protected from the actions of the ultraviolet light.
There's no doubt in people with higher melanin, natural higher melanin, that it's far more likely that melanin will be coating the nucleus, the cell wall of the nucleus of the DNA. Now the point about that is that ultraviolet light, which is often used to splice DNA, is blocked by that melanin. It absorbs it. It doesn't allow it in to interfere with the DNA. And it could well be, and this is Nigel's thesis, that this was a blocker for them when they were trying to genetically alter the species. And therefore, when maybe just out of random mutation, something like an albino came along, they discovered, wow, we can get straight in
Right.
And it may well be that the paler-skinned nation, people on the earth, have that pale skin because of this genetic experimentation to make things easier for them to work on human DNA. And in fact, Professor Steve Jones argues that this thing about vitamin D being, paler skin being there to allow vitamin D to be absorbed and so on, all these theories about why pale skin happened in the first place, he believes it's not an adequate explanation. There is no real explanation or justification for the need for pale skin at all.
Yeah, because I think if
Dark skin is always an advantage in every circumstance.
Right, as most people would just automatically assume, well, they went to live in the north where there's less sun,
Yes.
so therefore their skin changed colour. But that's not the case.
According
is it
to
not?
Professor Steve Jones, an eminent professor of biology, that is absolute nonsense.
Right. Okay.
There's just no reason at all for pale skin.
You would
Right.
want to absorb more
Yeah.
light, and I mean, why did we lose hair if we came to a colder climate, etc.
Yeah.
So obviously, something's wrong with that idea.
Right. All right. And Nigel contends that the white races, the northern European races, have probably had the most interference from this outside entity called the grey alien.
Yeah, and he doesn't say that. It's very important to say he doesn't say that from the point of view of a kind of reverse racism.
Right.
It's just he's letting us know that, right, that's there, you may need to do something about it,
Right.
and maybe suggesting ways that we could do something about it. And if you
Yeah.
look at the record of the European nations throughout history, in terms of colonialism, imperialism, and what the havoc they've wreaked on the
makes
world,
that point
it makes the point,
that
really.
it's the blue-eyed white races that have got
Yeah.
their finger on the nuclear. Well, I mean, what about China? Because he mentions the Chinese as well, doesn't he? He says that they've had significant intervention. Am I right there?
That's right.
It's the black people who haven't. Is that?
Not that they haven't. There's been interception all across the board. They found
Okay.
ways of doing it, but the most efficient way to do it is on cell nucleuses that aren't protected by the melanin shield.
Okay. Right.
That's just the most efficient, easiest way to do it.
Now let's come on to the final part of the thesis. Then they're making these changes because they're continually trying to attach themselves to us so that they can piggyback onto our souls.
That's right.
Have I read that right?
That's right.
So can you?
Which is impossible to do.
Right.
From their perspective and their programming, it's not realised that that's the case.
Right.
Yeah, that's the difference between a theme that runs throughout Nigel's books. The difference between what's natural and what's synthetic.
Mm-hmm.
And what's synthetic can never really bridge into what's natural. It's not possible to recreate a pathway back from the finite into the infinite, from our physical universe into the state beyond. You can't do that make a bridge out of atoms. It's just absolutely impossible.
Mm-hmm.
But as artificially created beings, they can't know that because they have no reference.
Right.
So they're looking for something that can allow them to somehow recreate their original creator beings in the best possible context that will allow them to survive physically as long as possible. But there's a problem, this second law of thermodynamics that's constantly breaking things down,
Right.
okay, all physical things. And they notice that there's something about human beings, about all living things, this natural living things, that has this information field that seems to return. And Nigel speaks about reincarnation in his books as the mechanism through which this happens, as an information field never ends. This information field from an eternal state can never end. It comes back, reincarnates. That they somehow detect this, and they're looking for that revitalizing factor somehow that will give their program from their original creator beings the chance to survive forever, like we do. As eternal souls.
And just to touch on that, Nigel says in his book that the Eastern religions talk about reincarnation. The West, people think they don't talk about reincarnation, but he says that this is not necessarily the case. All religions at some point in time believe in the migration of the soul.
That's right. All the mystical sides of all the main world religions, Kabbalah, Gnosticism, Sufism, all the main religions, their mystical sides, which pre-existed their more conventional mainstream sides now, believed in reincarnation. And in fact, the Christian church believed in it until this very strange episode happened with Justinian, who was the head of the church at the time, and his wife Theodora was told by a soothsayer that in a previous life she was a witch.
Right.
She therefore convinced her husband to take out reincarnation from the Christian Codex.
Really? Right.
So it may well be that in time, we've got all of this going on with these greys trying to assimilate us. Makes the story sound really horrible, for the future of the human race, and it's quite dangerous. But it may be that in times, past, great teachers have come along. In other words, people with souls with more awareness, more closer to the beginning point than we are, have come along really to warn us that this is going on. Because really, in the end, the only way out, if you have an eternal soul, then the only way really to overcome the problem of aliens and stuff is to really remove yourself from the physical component, and actually go back to that place where everything is all together.
Which is what the great teachers of the past, the Buddha, Yeshua, the Jewish name for Jesus, or the Muhammad, all the great teachers are saying this, and that's basically the central pillar of what Nigel's saying. But
so he thinks they were warning the human race about.
Yeah,
about
I mean,
the
it says Jesus
The
came to
danger,
save
yes.
us. What's he saving us from?
Right.
you see, the transhumanists are looking for some kind of physical immortality in a state which is absolutely lunatic, because they can create all of this, and they're not going to be there to be aware or conscious of this artificially intelligent entity they've created, reflecting themselves outside of themselves, and they themselves will be gone.
Yeah.
But physical immortality, if you want to be there to consciously appreciate it, is impossible.
Right.
But immortality beyond the physical state, that's the thing.
So really this transhumanism is really sort of a set of physically oriented prosthetics for something awareness and your soul and your consciousness is already able to do if you look at it in that way.
But it's beguiling, and so beguiling that, people will see, right, let's say a mother has a baby and she's told, well, if you implant this chip into your child, they're going to be more intelligent and have a better memory and be able to do all kinds of things in life, like even musical talent, whatever, and your child will have this advantage. And the mother might think, well, I'm not going to do this because this is awful, I don't want to interfere with my child's body like this is wrong. But then that mother might think, oh God, but what if the other mothers do this? Their children will have an advantage over mine. And then the whole thing escalates, everybody's doing it, and if that's the whole point that Nigel makes, which is the warning that he puts in his books, and he's going to make this very clear in his third book, which will be published in the near future, that if you do interfere with the natural scope of a conscious, aware being with these artificial quantums, then those chips, those interfering elements can be hacked into, can be controlled from outside, mind control, or control, in fact, by these grey alien entities who are masters of technology.
People say that it's a hybridization program, so they're making part human or part alien. Now, how will then that allow them to attain our soul? You can explain that, John.
Yeah,
What's Nigel saying when he's...
the concept is that the soul, if you like, or the potential part of you is in a continuum outside of atoms and therefore outside of force. But the thing is that while you're within atoms, while you're within a living system, there are symmetries of molecules to do with really shape of water, etc., in which you can actually get these fields, both the physical field and the outside field, which is you, to really resonate, causing this living structure. Well, when that actually parts, when your blood stops flowing and your biomagnetic field slows down...
When you die.
Yeah, when you die, that's no longer held in, and it actually gets out. But it has to get out through increasing or decreasing levels of tension, of force. Now, some of these edges of the force are still, because they're enforced, these greys can actually plug into those little edges. They can't get into the place where, where it goes far enough, the force can't get in there. But they can get you along the edge. And if you have, for instance, have qualities, that are going to bring you back again, then they can actually sort of put little bits at the edge, little sort of nip away at the edge of your soul, if you like, to really to implant qualities that when you come back again, you're a little more like them. And then when that starts to happen, there's that type of part of you is no longer so much under your control. And therefore you tend to keep then coming back as being more and more subject to them,
Yes.
and that's a type of hybridization in a way.
It's, you see, it's their, as according to Nigel's thesis, it's their aim through their program to put their program into us. That's their way of, when he talks about riding piggyback on us, that's what it means, putting their program into us so that we become as much like them as possible, and therefore they live on as we live on in their terms. They believe they're living on.
And
as
they
we
do live on, and our bodies do live on. But what is then us is dissolved into a hive mentality.
It's quite difficult concept. These are quite difficult concepts to grasp. But he has been very brave in putting forward this whole thesis as to why. And he claims that this whole thing explains the UFO phenomenon. Why people see UFOs and why they're taken by UFOs.
Yeah, I mean, there is a simpler way to explain it, which he does. He's actually, in some of his interviews, he's spoken about this. He uses the analogy of a text message on a mobile phone. And if a soul, the information of a soul, let's call it a soul field, is like a text message being sent from one phone to another, okay, then that text message can be, the dangers come when that text message can be hacked into and interfered with.
Right.
So that we're no longer in control of our own information field anymore. And we become less and less that perfectly free being we once were before devolution happened.
Right.
We become even more restricted than we would naturally be as physically devolved beings from that perfect state, until we lose our sense of humanity altogether and become, in our psychologies and in our human qualities, very much like machines. And you can really see that that's the way people are going these days. They are becoming more and more like machines. They're living through the internet. They're not communicating with people one-to-one anymore. Everything is becoming virtual. Everything is becoming synthetic.
And just to finish, I mean, Nigel, in his book, he says that he believes that certain people within the intelligence agencies, and I interviewed a guy called Dan Sherman who backs this up, have either worked with or are aware of the entire Grey Project, and it's covered up. So what's are the Greys controlling the hierarchy on this planet through intelligence agencies and the media?
I mean, based on the reports of others, I've got no, personal information to that effect, but it makes sense, how being told such a thing.
So you think the Greys could have subverted the whole information and power hierarchy of
with the intelligence that they have at their disposal, and with what they've done so far, there's no reason to believe they wouldn't do that. They would do everything they possibly can to efficiently and effectively spread their program throughout their human hosts.
Right.
So there's no
reason. And
it's
clear that it's something about us that they want, because if they, with technology like that, if you wanted the planet, why mess around for 200,000 years? Okay. You've got the planet.
And if we can finish on a positive note, is there any light at the end of the tunnel on this? Because it's quite disturbing material if it's true.
Well, as I said, this great teacher, Jesus and the others really said, follow me, and you'll go to the kingdom of heaven. What that really means is here's a blueprint for how to add things back together in life rather than subtract them. Really, to bring yourself back to that origin point.
But how can people do that if they're being abducted against their will? What can people? Is there anything people can do?
Well, interestingly, Nigel says about abductees, he believes that, contrary to what you might expect, that they're people who are most intercepted and most interfered with in this way, that they're actually the ones that they're having trouble intercepting, the ones they're having problems getting through to. Okay. And so really it does identify abductees as people who do have quite a lot of hope in that there's something resistant about them to the grey interception process.
And one final comment, I've been discussing this with John, that if ETs are interfering with genetics, I've said to you and others that, well, why can't we get their genomes sequenced and compare them with their parents and then spot any changes in the genes? And basically it's not quite as simple as that, is it, John? It's
not. I mean, the genetics we're talking about is really the whole mechanism of inheritance, etc. DNA is really a part of it. DNA has a certain code based on these 4 bases, and really to determine whether those 4 bases have been changed, You know, in individuals, you'd need to know what they were like beforehand. You'd need to test an awful lot of people. But it's far more likely that, they're going to mess with the machinery that controls or switches on and off
Yeah.
DNA.
John gave me a lesson in epigenetics earlier on today, so
So things like epigenetics, these are molecular switching systems which are really then controlled by, you know, the coordination of biological
yeah.
water followed by electric fields, which really you've got this hierarchy of effect from your soul field, your quantum field, if you like, really imparting information into the biology through these mechanisms. And therefore, you know, if one wants to look for one particular molecular event, it's not likely you're really going to find it very easily.
Right. All right, chaps and chapesses, thanks very much for talking to me today.
Thanks a lot, Richard.
Go on.
Okay, just one thing. You were talking about what hope is there when it seems a very negative picture. And throughout Nigel's book, as we've mentioned, he refers to the great teachers of the past and what they've suggested to all of us, and the qualities that to bring people together, to unite, to love and to care, that they always advocated that, not to be selfish, not to be self-centered. Okay. Now, Christ himself, there's several accounts in the Gnostic texts where Christ himself actually warned his apostles about this alien threat. In the second Apocalypse of James, in the Nag Hammadi texts, he talks about the pitiless ones and how they will take souls by theft.
Right.
And he